gonna walk around with this if that's all right, because I like moving around. So this is a picture of Chris. Chris, I want to thank for doing an incredible job with this conference. In its second year, this has come together like really, really amazingly well. And I know Chris and Mina did a whole lot of work for this. So I wanted to thank them for that. If you guys want to give them a little clap, that'd be nice. But now I'm done being nice to Chris, because I have this public platform, and I want to take advantage of it to rag him a little bit. You see, Chris is in my fantasy football league, and Chris has been winning a lot lately. But Chris isn't setting his lineup. So I want y'all to do me a favor. If you could just tweet this now for me to remind Chris to set his lineup, I would be so happy. So aside from fantasy football, a little bit about me. I live in New York City. I work in Brooklyn, live in the Upper West Side. It's nice, it's fun. I work for a company called Eponym. Eponym is creating software as a solution to help brands make, manufacture, and distribute custom eyewear. So if you think of like Warby Parker is a single brand making and distributing eyewear. We make and distribute eyewear for other brands. One of our brands is called Classic Specs. And to thank y'all for coming and listening to me talk about this, we have this coupon code, FEDConf14. If you use it at classicspecs.com, I think you'll get like $10 off. And we're $10 cheaper than Warby. So it's like $20 off your glasses, dude. You can't beat that. It's great. They're beautiful. You look like a cool Brooklyn hipster. Everyone will thank you for it. You look like the ads in the last talk. So another thing about me is I love the web. Like, I'm just obsessed with it. I've been doing this stuff and on the web in different capacities since I was like a teenager. I learned how to code doing a punter on AOL for Metallica songs. So it would blast you the lyrics to like Ride the Lightning and then punt you off the chat room. It was awesome. You guys should look it up. So I love the web, and so what I did was I wrote a book about it. And I wrote a book on responsive web design. It is being printed at this moment by Manning.com. It's available on the website. After this talk, I'll send out a tweet with a coupon code for it that'll get you like 50% off. So just look out for that. So all that showing out of the way, let's get into the meat of this. While writing the book, I thought a lot about content. When you're writing a bunch of content, you can't help but think about media. You can't help but think about what you're having to say. But I realized that content outside of context is a little bit lost. Content needs context. Everything that you see from great works of art in a museum to articles you read online is applied by some sort of context of the things that came before it. Everything has its proper time and place. What you have to say is as important as how you say it. So I have a theory that context can impact design, that context is critical to efficient design, to beautiful design. This is something that we've already kind of talked about with responsive web design. It's something that we've already proven as being a bit true. But today we're going to talk about it a little bit more. We're going to define contextual awareness. We're going to talk about its applications in web design. We're going to go through some level 4 media queries, some stuff that's coming up in the media query spec. And then at the end, I'm just going to kind of summarize and wrap it all up nicely. So part 1, what is contextual awareness? I was asked this in preparing this talk by a friend of mine. And the email I responded with was something like this. It's appropriating user context based on JavaScript accessible data points, just a bunch of shit. Mark Twain once said, if you have something good to say, try to say it in less words. So I tried to sum it down to this. Contextual awareness uses JavaScript to access available data points within a user's environment to adjust the design accordingly. I keep saying data, and it throws me off, but I'm going to try to break that habit. Data. Data. Use JavaScript to connect the design. It's the user to the design. Simpler way of saying the same thing. So contextual awareness in its simplest form is the use of JavaScript to connect the user to the design of a page. And in order to do this, we use something called sensors. This is a term I'm borrowing from physical computing. When you are dealing with any kind of physical computing, whether it's like an Arduino or a light switch, you have something called a sensor. A sensor can be as simple as like a proximity sensor on your iPhone that detects something that's going on around you and changes your phone according to whether or not it's against your head. Or it can be a light switch, whether the switch is on and off. And it changes what the light does, right? So we're already familiar with the idea of sensors in web design. The simplest form is that they come in like a media query, at media, and then some kind of sensor. Minimum width, maximum width, things like that are a form of sensor. Within that media query, we send an adjustment to the design. So we're already kind of doing this like sensor and system pattern with our designs. I'm just kind of trying to take it a little bit further. A lot of my inspiration for this idea came from this paper by two guys out of the Department of Computer Science at Columbia University, B.N. Shillett and M.M. Thiemer. They wrote this Disseminating Active Map Information to Mobile Hosts, and it gets into contextual-aware computing by providing clients with information about location-based objects and how those objects change over time. This is something we actively do currently as well. If you're familiar with like the little carousels you put on the homepage, those little like rotating, you know, everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? Like you got the 3 dots under it and it slides through different images. That is a sort of form of contextual-aware computing. As time goes on, those slides change. The design of a site is changing as time advances. Historically, the web has taken its cues from traditional media as well. So like, we get the idea of changing context of a site the more somebody looks at it, as evident by the carousel idea. But this is something we kind of borrowed from television. Television changes its programming as the day goes on. So your 8 o'clock programming is a little bit more kid-friendly. 9 o'clock, it's a little bit more adult. By 10 p.m., you're full-blown cop and medical drama, grown-up time. Which, like, have you guys seen that new How to Get Away with Murder? My wife loves that show, and that is some adult shit. That is, like, straight-up Showtime grown-up programming. Grown-up programming. So Google uses available data to extend contextual awareness across its products. When you look at something in search, you might see that reflected in maps. So like I look up, let's say, a good place to buy a pair of jeans. I might get jean shops when I look at stuff in my maps. When I'm looking at my commute home, you'll see little like pins come up with businesses. Facebook is also really good about this. Recently, they got caught doing like a psychology study on people. Yeah. It's crazy, right? Like changing how, like doing like an experiment on like how people respond to good or bad news. But this is a form of like contextual awareness. So like, we think you're kind of looking at this sort of stuff more, so we're gonna like change the context of the site for you. So on the back end, we're pretty familiar with this stuff, but not on the front end as much, not within design. Now, Apple's M7 coprocessor, the stuff in the iPhone 5S and the iPhone 6, opens up a whole new set of capabilities on the native app level. So you have barometers now, you've got not just the gyroscopes and the compasses anymore, but you got stuff like pedometers to track steps, and you can even track how fast somebody is moving in a native iOS app. So if somebody's in a car driving, there is a certain, like, essentially media query for that. Or if they're walking, there's a way to like activate that and adjust the design accordingly. If they're standing still, you can use a whole different set of components. So this is something that we're seeing more and more in computing. We're seeing it on the back end. We're seeing it in native apps. And as is the trend, I think that we'll see this on the web as well. This is a pattern we've seen a lot in the progression of the web. Stuff gets adapted natively, then it comes into the web. So that brings me to my next part, Contextually Aware Web. Now there's 4 kind of key pieces of context that I've identified and been focusing on when it comes to augmenting a design for users. The first is obviously the user themselves, the task the user is attempting to accomplish, the environment that they are trying to accomplish it in, so where is the user, and the technology they're trying to accomplish these tasks with. The technology one's going to be pretty familiar for most of you guys because it's something that we've talked about ad nauseum for the last few years. The other 3 open up some really interesting possibilities. So we'll start with user. What can we contextualize about the person on the other side of any screen that we're designing for? Now in this point, I want to kind of point something out. It's important to not confuse a user with a device. A user has a set of ideas, a set of goals, a set of things that he or she wants to accomplish. The device doesn't necessarily mean that those are unique or like kind of walled off. Somebody is going to likely want to do the same things on a desktop or an iPad that they do with an iPhone. And we make this kind of assumption to give us an excuse to change things, but it's really not accurate, and there's not a whole lot of research to back it up. Some example users. Now, the physically impaired, this is a big one that stuff like ARIA tags can help out with, but there's other things like the contrast of your site and feeding CSS that works well for screen readers, or designing your site so it can be read by a screen reader, that are an important piece of context around the user, whatever their physical ailments might be. Specific objectives a user might have. If a user has a specific pattern that they're doing within their interface, they likely have a specific objective that they're constantly trying to satisfy, and that's something that you can put weight in your design against. So one of the examples that I've seen recently of this is if you have a common UI pattern that you lean on, like icons, you click icons more than you do text. Some interfaces will start relying more on icons in the navigation and less on text, and kind of migrate the focus over. There's also the idea of a limited meaningful scope that I've been playing with. Certain users only have a certain scope of the site that's useful for them. In Eponym, we have a great example of this in that we sell men's eyeglasses and women's eyeglasses. A man has a limited meaningful scope when he's shopping for eyewear. He's mostly looking for men's glasses. And a woman, similarly, they just want women's eyeglasses. So this is a very limited scope of things that they're interested in our site. If somebody self-identifies as a man, and they've established a pattern that they're often shopping for themselves, we don't really want to waste their time showing them a bunch of women's glasses, because they're not looking to buy those. Tasks. So this is kind of bleeds over a little bit into user, but what do we know the user is trying to accomplish? Again, repeated interactions, like I was saying, the same UI patterns over and over again that they're leaning on. In the case of, say, a banking app, if somebody's always using your banking app to look at just their balance and then they're leaving, we can kind of circumvent the need to take those clicks and just show them their balance right at the front. Implied relationship. So if somebody has self-identified in a certain way, I worked on an e-com site much like Eponym, where somebody self-identifies as it was for a flower site. So they self-identified as somebody who buys flowers for birthdays. So we augment the UI to focus more on birthdays as opposed to anniversaries and things like that. And then stated objective. Again, something that somebody openly says that they want to accomplish on your site. Environment is the next point. Where does the user, or does where the user is affect what they might want to see? So this could be anything from country, city, state, where they are geographically. Beyond that, what time of day it is for them, when in the day it is, what their environment could be, the middle of the night, the middle of the day, or the weather in that environment. So this is a little bit more accessible through APIs, but I've been using dark sky lately to detect what the weather is in a user's environment and see if there's any kind of logical patterns that we can identify that relate to weather. And then technology. So like I said, this is the one that we're most familiar with in the responsive design conversation. But what technology are they using to access the site? Obviously, we have mobile, tablet, and PC. But there's also hardware limitations that might be unique to the user. Whether they have access to a mouse to point on the screen, or if they're using a touch screen, there's specific kinds of limitations that certain pieces of hardware can't do. We'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about level 4 media queries. And then input types. Does the user have a microphone available to them to speak into a search box as opposed to type it out? Do they have some alternative means of input that are accessible and that can change the way they might want to interface with the site? And are they willing to use them? So again, let me reiterate, we don't want to confuse a device with a user. A certain user has both a device and their personal preferences, and we want to keep those kind of ideas separate. So I used all of these 4 points to create what I call contextual breakpoints, just borrowing some language from responsive web design because it was convenient for me. But here's the kind of idea of contextual breakpoints. So we'll use the example of time, like I talked about. And let's break it off into 3 main blocks of time: morning, afternoon, and night. So these could serve as our 3 contextual breakpoints in our site. So let's say, for example, we are building a site for a giant corporate coffee chain that has, stores on every block, and they're everywhere, and there's this monolithic corporate being, but they're always selling coffee, and the site's an important component of that. They might change their messaging on the time of day because that impacts how people consume coffee, right? So in the morning, you would want coffee. You want regular old traditional pick-me-up coffee. The noon, maybe you don't want something as caffeinated, maybe you want some tea, something a little bit milder. And then at night, if you happen by one of these places, maybe you want one of those stupid frappy milkshake, whatever you call them, bullshits. So we put that forward. Those things are friggin' disgusting, by the way. No offense if you dig them. I'm sure they're delicious, but that is straight up sugar. They are awesome, too. I'm not saying they're not awesome. So in this example, our contextual breakpoints are morning, noon, and night. All right? So we change the messaging based on what region of time the user is experiencing the site in. And this is how we do it. It's a little bit washed out. I don't know if you guys can read it. But essentially what I've done here is I've just created a kind of global variable called sensors. Within that, I have 3 functions: morning, afternoon, and evening. And these are just going to be sensors to detect what time of day it is. It's going to just get the hours, feed that back, and return a Boolean value on whether or not it satisfies the statement. So here we just have 3 functions that are just going to return true or false. Only one of them should be true at any given time. And that will give us a touch point in relating to our design, right? This gives us a bridge through that plane of glass of the user's device. Now, a little point: all contextual breakpoints should result in either true or false statements. There is a kind of use for ranges and a little bit grayer areas in between, but in my experience, at this point, it's just easier to make a yes or a no question around a piece of contextual data. So now we have these 3 if statements, essentially. We can use them in if statements to qualify our actions or qualify our changes to the design. So as simple as this, it's kind of getting cut off, but there's supposed to be an I there, obviously. So if morning, do some stuff. But let's make it. I made it a little bit more complicated. So we'll say for var in sensors, console log the results of it. Now we're just going to loop through all 3 sensors and return true, true, or true, false, false, or something like that. So now with this loop, if one of them qualifies, we can do some work on the DOM to change how something is displayed, change some class names. We have essentially built a Modernizr test out for our contextual breakpoints. Now obviously contextual breakpoints are so fluid and dynamic, it's really hard to build just a library or a framework around them because you every case is individual, and you kind of want to work towards your design's specific needs. But using this kind of logic, you can have a really simple is-class on your HTML tag that gives you the ability to change in CSS how certain things are designed. Now, like I was saying, there is actually a JavaScript library for contextual awareness called nomi.js. This is made by a guy named James Becker. James is awesome. I wrote an article on this, James read it, and then 2 days later wrote this nomi.js. And it's beautiful. It has a bunch of breakpoints that you can use around a user's motion, a user's location. It has breakpoints for time of day, obviously, and a bunch of other stuff. So I encourage you guys to get in there, get creative, get playful, see how you can use it to impact your designs. And it's as simple as just calling nomi, and once it's ready, executing a function against the sensors that are packaged within the framework, and you're ready to roll. You're ready to change out your design. But it does get simpler, right? With level 4 media queries, we have access to a user's context in ways that we hadn't before. And it opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. I'm going to try to drink some water. What's the guy's name? Mark Rubio, that did this on CNN or something? And all the talk shows were laughing about it. Nothing? Did that just like fall dead? Was that just really a really bad joke? Did I save it by being self-aware? Is my wife blushing because she's listening to me from the back? So with level 4 media queries, there are a few really interesting possibilities. So this is the light level media query that's introduced in the spec. So here you have like at media, light dash level, and you can drop a value in there. The values break down like this: dim, normal, washed. This is super helpful, and I want to encourage everyone to kind of look into this and see if it applies to your site. Say somebody stays up late because they don't want to get behind in Game of Thrones, and their wife goes to bed. The dog goes to bed with the wife, and this dude's watching Game of Thrones, and it's over. It's 2 in the morning. Goes to bed. He's like, "What's going to happen to Tyrion Lannister? I don't know. I'm worried. I can't sleep." This person, not me, but this person, is freaking out at night. Cracks open his iPhone to Google Tyrion Lannister because this person doesn't care about spoilers. Don't judge them. You don't need to do that. But the white light of Wikipedia wakes up his wife. The wife is waked up. She's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" The dog is now awake. The dog wants to play. The dog wants to get rubbed. This poor guy, his date night could have been saved if you'd have put this light level in there and saved him the trouble. Say if it's dim light, you can use this media query to like make the backgrounds black instead of white, so it doesn't blast this dude in the face with a bunch of white light, or his wife. It's normal light, like a normal indoor comfortable light level. You can use like your normal style sheets and maybe use a little bit of white. If it's washed out, like in the outdoors, it's a lot of sun, it's a lot of light, you can use a higher contrast in your CSS to change how stuff is displayed and make things a little bit more readable. This is something I find really interesting. This kind of touches on the idea, it's getting cut off a little bit again, but the idea of setting a custom media set with JavaScript, and then you can use that within, it's accessible within your media queries. So this is a part of the spec that there's not a lot of information around, and hopefully it'll get pushed a little bit more, and maybe one day I'll work up the energy to contribute to it. But you can actually set custom media variables. So this is like that integer-based value system that I was talking about. Like you could set a value and then access it, and if it's less than a certain, if an object is less than a certain value or greater than a certain value, use CSS to style it so you don't have to drop those is classes and block DOM rendering. Now there's also a lot of talk around the pointer media query. Pointer is used to define the target area that a device can point at. So when you use a touch screen, your finger is the pointer. And it has a pretty big target area, the area that your finger can mash into. That's like, say, 20, 30 pixels of space. A traditional mouse has a much smaller target area, 3, 5 pixels, really small area. There's a big difference in how you might want to adjust your interface for those pointer areas. So these media queries kind of give you access to that. Pointer coarse, something like your finger that has a giant touch area. Fine is a really small touch area, like a stylus or a mouse. In addition, there's hover. So hover is used to determine if the pointing device is capable of hovering. What this means is if you can remove your hand from the pointing device and it can stay where it is. This maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you think about a lot of our interface models, they rely on the idea that a pointer can be steady and consistent, that a user can jump back and forth from the keyboard to the pointing device, grab their mouse again, and move the pointer on the screen. When you lose that capability, you lose a lot of stuff that might be hidden in a hover. Certain tooltips, certain drop-down navigations that rely on a static state. So a hover media query gives you the ability to serve different styles to users who use a hovering input. Now, display quality control features. There's 3 of them here that I kind of wanted to touch on. This is, what kind of quality does your display give out? If your display is something like this, that's like, you can see it like scanning. This is actually a great example. There is a display quality media for scan, which means that a device progressively scans as it renders a page, or as it renders the visuals. In that case, you might want to rely less on transitional elements and animation, because that scan is going to break your animation. It's going to look a little janky, as you might say. Resolution, we're pretty familiar with this in like the Retina, high DPI displays. It's the same kind of idea. Update frequency is how quick a monitor can update. So if you have something like a Kindle Paperwhite or something like that, it takes a good second for that to update and refresh entirely. Whereas like a 4K monitor updates very frequently. So again, it would change the way you rely on animation based on how quickly a monitor can update. So in summary, iOS 8 is kind of built around contextual awareness. It takes a lot of your iMessages and kind of gives you suggestions on how to fill out the iMessage automatically. It has a lot of sensors to determine where you are and what you're up to. And it's becoming more and more something that's expected of computers to know about you. Contextual awareness requires thoughtfulness and imagination, though. It's really important, I can't stress this enough, that if you decide to go down this route, it requires of you that you be thoughtful and imaginative with how you implement it. Because if you're not, you end up with this guy. Just using a trigger and kicking in something that you predetermined is not a satisfying contextual awareness. You want to adapt. You want to grow with the user. You want to acknowledge them and their relationship to your product and take small steps along the way, not just kind of plunk this guy down. And the last point I really want to make that I really hope you guys take away from this is that the Internet of Things still needs the internet, right? The wearables and all the things that we see coming out, Nest, all these new products that are bringing the internet close to our daily lives still rely on the internet. They use APIs, but you still need some point of interfacing with them consistently. And a lot of the burden of that is going to fall on us front-end designers and developers. It's going to come down to us to figure out the user patterns and the experiences that work best with the Internet of Things and the APIs that are going to be enriching our lives in the future. You know, it's down to people like us that are going to make the Tesla interfaces of the future and the watch faces. These things are coming to us now, and it's important for us to respect that, respect our users and the context in which they use the things that we build. We're responsible for the interface. We're responsible for how people interact with very important pieces of their lives, between telling what time of day it is or operating their car now. So don't take that with a grain of salt. That's like some really important stuff to dwell on. With that, I want to thank you all for your time. It's been great talking to y'all once again this year, and yeah, that's all I got.